Hi guys, and welcome back to Drive to School Chat, where we discuss a subtopic in geography on our way to school. Now today we are going to be talking about rivers as a system. Okay, so let's get started then. So first of all, we are going to look at, or we are going to discuss what a system is. I'll give you an illustration of a system, and then we'll move on to the rivers as a system. Now, a system or a system has inputs, processes, and outputs. Now, that means that, there's something coming into the system, and then there are flows within that system. There are some processes that are taking place within the system. And then lastly, there's also an output, something that is given out from the system or out of the system. So a quick example is the computer. So the computer can be seen as a system. Now, if you're in school and you decide, okay, I'm going to do my homework in the library today, or on one of the school computers, whether that be in the library or somewhere else, then you will sit at the computer and you will need to input some information into the computer before you actually access the use of the computer. So you'll need to put in your username and your password, and then the computer is going to process that information, and then it's going to give you an output. So the processing is a kind of a flow, because the information will flow through the computer system, and then of course it's stored within the computer system, that username and password, so that when you input the information, then you can be given an output, and the output will either be you'll be allowed onto the system, or you'll not be allowed into the system. So if you enter the correct username and password, you will be allowed onto the system, and that will be the output. But the second type of output you may get is one where you're not allowed onto the computer system. So it tells you, oh, you've entered the wrong username and password. Okay, so you need to re-enter your information again. So that's another type of output. So it's an output that is not favorable to you, because you now need to re-enter your username and password. Anyway, now let's go beyond that. What about rivers as a system then? Now, the rivers have got one main input, and they also have flows and stores within the system, or within the river system, and they also have outputs. Okay, so the main input into the system is precipitation. So precipitation, it means rainfall, or rain, hail, sleet, or snow. Okay, so that brings water into the system. So that water comes from the atmosphere and gets onto the land. Now, once that water gets onto the land, then there are flows or transfers, if you like, and stores as well. Now, meaning that when the water gets to the ground, the first thing that is going to happen, actually before it even gets to the ground, is that you will have trees intercepting that rainfall. So trees will be in the way of that rainfall and will interrupt the raindrops. Okay, so that process of interception is a kind of a store, because the water will be stored in the leaves, before it reaches the ground. If we are talking about very cold areas where we get snow other than rainfall, then that snow may be stored in those trees, on the branches of those trees, for a significant length of time. So if it has been snowing for a while, then the snow could stay on the tree for days, right? So that's a store. So the water will be held in storage there. Then the water will eventually, obviously, get to the ground, and when it gets to the ground, it's going to infiltrate the soil. Now, that process obviously is just water sinking into the soil. So infiltration is another flow within the system. So the water is moving from one part of that cycle or system to another. So it's moving from the surface. Well, obviously it has moved from the surface, and then from the from the atmosphere rather, and then now it moves from the surface into the soil. Now, however, if you have the water being in excess, so if you have too much water, then the ground may not be able to infiltrate that water quickly enough. And in that kind of situation, you're going to have saturated soils. So saturated soils are a type of a store in the system, because the water will sit on the surface, because the soil is saturated, and the water will also be held in the soil. Now, in cases where the water is not, the ground is not saturated and the water is within the soil, so has infiltrated and is being held as moisture or just dampness within the soil, then that is another type of store within the soil, and that is called soil moisture. Okay, so we have talked about a number of flows so far. We've talked about infiltration being a store, a flow. Then we've talked about saturated soils being a store. Then we've also talked about soil moisture being a store. Then some of that water is going to sink deeper into the soil. And as it sinks deeper into the soil, it will then go to the rocks that are well below the soil level. And that process of the water moving through the soil and getting to the rocks below is referred to as percolation. So percolation is another flow within the system, that water, once it reaches the ground, the rocks will now be held, will either be held within the rocks, okay? And if it's held within the rocks, it's referred to as groundwater store. So it's just going to be held within the rocks. But then that water could also start flowing towards the river through the rocks. And that flow through the rocks to the river is referred to as groundwater flow, and is an example of another flow within the river system. Now, going back to the soils just briefly, I've just realized that I did not mention through flow. And through flow is where the water in the soil finds its way or moves through the soil and finds its way to the river. So that's another flow within the system. So we have through flow through the soil, or water flowing through the soil. Then we have groundwater flow, water flowing through the rocks deep below the surface. Okay, so let's talk about a few other flows here. Well, another one flow. So we've talked about through flow, we've talked about groundwater flow. The other flow that I'd like to mention here is surface runoff. Now, we said that the soil sometimes will get saturated with water. So if the precipitation, the input is too high, then it means, or that, if it's, yes, high and falls within a short period of time, then that soil will not be able to infiltrate all that precipitation within a reasonable length of time, and therefore the water is going to sit on the surface. Now, it will not just sit on the surface, but it will flow towards the river, because it's draining from that drainage basin and flowing to the river. Now, we'll talk about drainage basins in a different video, but for the time being, the water will flow over the surface, and when it's flowing over the surface, then it's called surface runoff, and it will obviously eventually reach the river. Now when it reaches the river, then that river acts as an output. Okay, so I think that covers it. Where the river as a system is concerned. So we have oh yes, actually the trees will give off transpiration. Yes, that's something that is important that we need to mention. The trees will give off transpiration because they will suck up some of the water through the roots, and then some of the water is also going to be given off from the tree into the atmosphere, where it will eventually condense, form clouds, and then you have a lot, you'll have more precipitation. So that actually is also part of the river system. So that's important to remember, transpiration, or evapotranspiration, if you like. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. So we've talked about the river as a system. So a river has input, and as an input, because it's just one, so that's precipitation, and then it has flows, stores, and outputs. So those stores include interception, they include soil moisture, they include groundwater, and then we have the flows. The flows will include surface runoff. They will include through flow as the water flows through the soil. They will include groundwater flow as the water flows through the rocks. And then the river is going to act as the output in the system. Now, how is that river an output actually? Let's just talk about that briefly. The water in the river is likely to evaporate while in the river, and is also likely to, so that's evaporation. So we'll then give off that water into the atmosphere to form clouds and give you more rainfall. But then it's an output because you have some of the water leaving the river system and going into the coastal system, because you will have that river draining rather into either the sea or into lakes and so on. So it will leave that river system and go into another system. Okay, so that is the way in which the river is an output in the system. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this Drive to School chat on rivers as a system. Thank you very much for joining me on this journey to good exam results. This is the intention of these videos, to ensure that we understand all the concepts that we need to in geography, so that come the examination time, we are able to do the questions that we are going to be presented a lot more effectively. Now, if you would like us to discuss any topic of your choice, please let me know through the comment section below, and we will discuss that topic during one of the mornings on our way to school. Okay, thanks again for joining, and all the best, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.